Okay, welcome to episode 3 of the Java tutorials. So in this one we're going to be learning how to make loops. Loops. For and while loops. So the one I'm going to be teaching you first is a for loop. It's more centralized and less complicated. And its format might be harder to learn, but it's the one that helps you the best. So let's start out with a basic variable here. Int x is equal to... Actually, we don't even need it. So let's start just with the for loop. So the for loop has 3 parts, right? The 3 parts are located within the parentheses. The first part is the declaration... the instantiation, sorry. So int I is equal to 0, right? It's got technically like 3 different lines of code in it, you could think. So the declaration, the condition, and the iterator. So you could call this the declaration, the instantiation, whatever you want. Basically, what's going on here is that the first part right here is where you start the variable that runs throughout the loop. And I know this doesn't make sense, but what loops basically do is they have a variable and they check the condition of the variable to see if they should keep running. And if they should keep running, they go and they're at the bottom, they go to the top, they check this conditional, then they run down again, they go back to the top. If they check the conditional and it's false, they go after this line. So they go here, right? But if it's true, then they keep going and executing this code. And at the end of every single iteration, the for loop does whatever this iterator is. And in this case, I said I++, which is basically adding 1 to I every time. So what it's going to say is, this variable I is equal to 0. Is I less than 10? Yes. Execute this code. And it's going to go to the bottom, and then it's going to go back to the top, and it's going to say, it's going to add 1 to I, so I is now equal to 1. Is I less than 10? Yes. Then it's going to go down again. And so we can find this out easily by just printing out I through every single iteration. What's going to happen is it's going to print 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's printing every single time it goes down, all the way up to 9. And see, when it hits 9, it goes down here, it goes up, it adds 1 to I, right? It says I is equal to 10. And now since I is equal to 10, this statement no longer holds true, and it goes here. So that's a for loop. And what you could easily have the issue of doing here is creating an infinite loop. So let's say instead of adding 1 to I every time, you subtracted 1. Well, now you've got an infinite loop on your hands, and it's just going to keep printing infinitely increasing negative numbers. And that's why this button right here is so useful. It kills your program instantly. As you can tell, my computer's fast enough that I already got to negative 719,000 before I managed to switch this thing off. And you can see it keeps going all the way up. If I scroll up, it just starts loading more. So that's an infinite loop. And if you're doing something really complicated rather than just printing out a number, it's bad. Okay, it could wreck your computer. Now, the reason it happens is because every time it checks, is I less than 10, it's 0. Sure, less than 10. Go back up. Now it's negative 1, which is further away from 10. You're not getting any closer towards your goal, which means you're never going to reach it. And so your loop's just going to keep continuing forever. So we'll put this one back where it goes. So that's a for loop. Pretty basic, pretty simple. Remember, semicolons between these lines, not just regular colons. That's a mistake I and a lot of people make. So let's do a while loop. A while loop is sort of a more basic version of a for loop. It's less connected together. So for a while loop, we have to do int I is equal to 0. Have we already got... Okay. Well, another thing to pay attention to, normally if you did this twice, it would give you an error, right? Because the variable's already been declared. But here, this variable I here is local. It only exists within the for loop, right? Or in reference to it. So if I go outside the for loop and I declare another variable called I, the for loop here isn't going to cause problems with it. Except, I think, if I do this. Yes, it will. So as long as you declare the variable afterwards, if you have a variable named I, by the time you get to the for loop, then it's going to try to declare this I, and then you're going to run into some problems. But if it can declare this I successfully and run this code, then it'll basically delete that I, and the computer will no longer recognize it. It won't be saved in your memory anymore, and so you can start another variable named I. So int I is equal to 0, while, and then here's where we have our condition, I is less than 10. We put our parentheses, or our brackets, I mean, and at the end, we're going to do I++. So that's our condition, or that's our iterator, I mean. It's important where you want to put the iterator in the code. If you put it at the top, you're basically going to be starting 1 early every time, if that makes sense. You're going to be starting 1 higher than you should be, unless you intend to do it that way. I always prefer to put mine on the bottom because it's basically like a for loop. A for loop only iterates at the bottom, but you can do it at the top. It doesn't matter. And then it's going to head back to the top, check the condition. So we'll print out I again. And the reason I teach while loops second is because they're much more prone to error. You know, it's much easier to get an infinite loop when you're using a while loop than as if you were doing another type of loop. So I just bracketed out, or sorry, oops. I just commented out the old for loop, and I'm gonna show you here that this while loop does what the for loop did. Now all I have to do is get rid of this condition statement, and we print the same number over and over again. Infinite loop, done. All I have to do is get the condition statement wrong. Infinite loop. If I put the condition statement, or not the condition statement, sorry. If I put the iterator outside of the loop, right? So if I put it out here, it wouldn't matter because it's going to keep running through the loop, and this code down here is never reached, right? So it never escapes the loop. Now, you can put if-else statements within loops, right? So let's go back to our for loop here because I don't like while loops. So that's all you're going to learn about while loops from me. So this is our for loop here. Now, let's say we wanted to check if I was an even number. How would we do that? Well, we use the modulus, right? So if I %2 is equal to 0, and what that is basically saying is if I divided by 2 is equal to 0, or if I can be divided by 2 with no remainders, right? So percent is modulus, which indicates the remainders. So it's dividing 2 into I as many times as it can. So that would give you our even numbers. So out here it'll print every even number, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. And then obviously it wouldn't print 10 because once we reach 10 the loop ends. Let's do else. And then we'll print out is odd, and now it's gonna do 0. Now it's odd. It's 2. Now it's odd. Now let's say once we reach 7, right? Else if I is equal to 7. How about once we reach 7, we want the loop to end, right? Now, obviously, we could just set this to 7, right? But once you get to more complicated loops where you're checking multiple conditions at the same time, your condition statement only tests one thing unless you use an or. So, right, like if I said if I is less than 10, and we have another loop here, x is equal to, and x is equal to 3, right? And then I changed x at every end, and I said x is equal to x x plus plus, right? And then I do and x is greater than 5. Like, you see how this becomes sort of convoluted, right? So sometimes it's better just to have an if statement within your loop to check a specific scenario. So what you do is you use the break command. So if I is equal to 7, then we break. We exit the loop. And if you click on break, it'll highlight the loop you exit. And so as soon as it runs across this break command, it's going to the end of the loop, which is here. Right? It's going to here, and it's going to read whatever code starts afterwards. It ends the loop immediately. And that's good. That's good to use when you're using more complicated inputs from the user. I'll show you guys in a menu program later how specifically that works. It's very useful for exiting, because sometimes you use infinite loops on purpose, right? You use, and that's why an intentional infinite loop, you would have while true, right? Because it's always going to evaluate that Boolean in there to be true, just like an if statement. So it's always going to be executed, but you must have a break somewhere. Some condition that you can reach to end the loop, and so you don't get an infinite loop effectively. It's an infinite loop, but it runs so long as some condition isn't met, and once that condition is met, the loop ends. So for a menu, that could be having the user enter negative 999, like, and then boom, the menu would end, your program would terminate, it's done. And so that's a quick and easy way to create an infinite loop without really breaking your computer. And so that's going to be this little lesson on loops. It's not very hard. It's just running the same program over and over and over again. Each time you want to iterate it more towards a condition, and that condition would break your loop. Or you can use a break statement. So that's that summarized. Hope you enjoyed. If you have questions, leave them in the comments below, and we'll see you. Bye.